Welcome to the Bible Forum. It is July 1st in 2018, and you are on the Bible Forum. This is the 4th of July week. A lot of stuff going on around the world and around your world, perhaps, on this particular ostentatious comes to mind, auspicious occasion. But there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, and I wanted to share some of that with you. I don't know if you pay attention to the news the way I do, but my ears perk up when I hear things going on that have anything at all to do with Israel, with end time scenarios and so forth. And just last week, we got word that the Turkish president, a fellow by the name of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, won 5 more years in office. He was a placeholder, and then he had his own election, and now he's had a second election. So he's been there a while, and he's going to stick around for a little while after this. 5 more years. He has sweeping new powers. There's been a decisive election victory. Everything went his way. It has solidified his hold politically and religiously and every other way on that country. His political alliance now has an overall majority in their parliament. Oh, he also has a new 5-year mandate, and although the president of Turkey can only serve 2 terms, this will count as his first term under the new constitution. So he's going to be here. They estimate that he could stick around till 2028. I'm thinking that means he'll be around for the great one, the great war that's coming. I don't know how much longer the world can stay the way it is without the Lord showing up and taking his church out. But, people have been wrong for a lot of years. And I was wrong once too. It's a joke. Turkey has been the sleeping giant in the war for Islamic domination of the Middle East and in Europe. Turkey is a member of NATO. It has the distinct reputation of being the least offensive of the Islamic countries. But all that seems to be coming to a conclusion. Turkey corresponds geographically to what we always referred to as Asia Minor. It was the place that was home to much of the Apostle Paul's ministry in the first century, as well as John set what do we call John? The guy that wrote the book of Revelation. The 7 churches that he referenced as being characteristic of the churches down through the ages all were in Asia Minor. They're in Revelation chapter 2, 3, 4. Also, Ezekiel's prophecy of end times event appears to include Turkey. It lists Gomer and Beth Togarmah as participants in Satan's effort to destroy Israel. Gomer is Turkey. Beth Togarmah, Beth meaning house of, the phrase means the house of Gomer. Gomer was a son of Japheth, one of Noah's children. Bible scholars are divided as to who Ezekiel's Magog really is in Ezekiel chapter 38. Historically, it's a nation of barbarous people in the north, meaning the north of Israel. Gog is the king who reigns over Meshech and Tubal. He is seen allied with Persia. We know it as Iran. Also aligned with Cush. We call that Ethiopia. And with Put. We call that Libya. Along with Gomer, as I already mentioned, is Turkey, all of which is an effort of this king to destroy Israel, there in the end times. God declares that He, God, is the enemy of Gog. And God will not allow Gog to succeed in his destruction of Israel. To have the God of heaven call you his enemy is to put you in the boat with Satan. These are not nice guys. Now, all this is assumed to happen during the Great Tribulation. It's a time period that is less really than 7 years, so it's a very small window of time for all of this stuff to happen. So it may be, probably will be, a much larger time leading up to the ultimate events. We may actually be around to see a lot of it taking place, which is where I come in to the story. I really believe that this is part of those beginning stages. Now, in the Bible, the first part of the Great Tribulation is chaotic. It talks about wars, it talks about famines and pestilence and global upheavals. It talks about the establishment of 10 kings to rule the world. All of that comes in response to the tremendous upheaval of all the wars, the pestilence, the earthquakes, the famine, and even a meteor which will destroy 1/3 of the Earth's landmass. Now, I'm of the opinion that is the Western Hemisphere. I don't know where you get 1/3 of the world's landmass all in one place if it isn't that. Now we can go over to Europe and you've got Russia and you've got China and all of that, and it could be, I guess, the eastern part, China and all like in there, Siberia, but we'll see how all that works out. I believe the kings that are being discussed in the book of Revelation are regional placeholders. They are rulers that have been appointed by what is now the global authority. That authority is Western. Think NATO or something like it. They're operating from some sort of United Nations type organization brought about in response to the tremendous emergency from all of this chaos that's going on. And the implication is that the Middle East will form the center of the chaos. The king who rules that particular region will probably be the one who is killed, or at least appears to be killed, and then comes back to life. And in doing so takes out two of the other of the 10 kings. In the process, do the math real quick, it whittles everything down to 7, with him as number 1 out of the whole bunch, and the 8th ruler. Leading up to these events, however, may be several years, decades perhaps. I don't think so. But there will be skirmishes, there will be chaos, there'll be maneuvering, and it'll involve Turkey, it'll involve Russia, it'll involve Iran and the North African Islamic nations, pushing and shoving all of them toward Israel and the domination of that particular region of the world. Turkish President Erdogan is now situated for just such a role. Turkey, as I mentioned, is still in NATO. They are friends with Russia. They are central to the region. Asia Minor has always been the pivot point between East and West. The next 15 years could be very, very interesting. In other eschatological news, or at least implication, is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is moving toward westernization. They're letting women drive cars. And it's because there's a younger king. The old guys are getting old, the young guys are coming in. They got more progressive ideas. Then there's also Egypt's cooperation with Israel in order to contain Hamas and the Palestinians. They don't like them either. America's overt favoritism toward Israel is emboldening Egypt to some extent. Then there's Great Britain sending a prince of the realm to visit Israel and Gaza for the first time. He's just finishing up that trip. Along with Iran's being isolated by the United States and China's aggressive moves in the South China Sea, building the artificial islands that extends their territorial boundaries, not to mention the aggressive expansion of Islamists throughout Europe, Canada, and even here at home. Erdogan's potential tenure of another 10 to 15 years could be significant. Now, the reality here is the majority of people on the planet discount biblical eschatology. They call it myth, they call it fancy, it's part of, that genre. But I think that's going to come back to bite them in the end. The large percentage of our churches are ignoring all of this as well. They don't pay a whole lot of attention to the Bible. Most churches, the Catholic Church hasn't opened a Bible in years. The liberal denominations, the so-called Reformation churches, they don't care anymore. The contemporary church movement isn't even bothering. None of them seem to care at all about any of this, except for a few notables who come out with a book or a movie or something to make a lot of money based on the prophecies. But as things go along, they're going to go along apace, as we say, according to God's timetable. And it's going to happen this way steadily until Jesus comes. The covenant theology folks hold to a couple of eschatological positions. One is called amillennialism. There's actually two types of amillennialism. Now, for those of you who may not understand the terminology, we're talking about the 1,000-year reign of Christ, the millennium, as the Bible characterizes it. And so the amillennialist, you put the letter A in front of it, negates the whole thing, agnostic as opposed to Gnostic. The amillennialists say there's not going to be a millennial reign of Christ at any point. But as I said, there are a couple of amillennial views. Augustinian view holds that the millennium is actually figurative. It's not actual. But then later in the late 19th, early 20th century was a guy by the name of B.B. Warfield. And he took the view from a German scholar by the name of Cleforth. This goes back to the late 1800s, which teaches that the saints of God already in heaven are reigning from there. And so Warfield had a kind of spiritual millennium. Those are the people who don't really believe there'll be a millennial reign of Christ. There are others that believe there will be, but that the church will not be removed, will not be resurrected, as it were, until after. These are post-millennialists. They see the spiritual resurrection in Revelation chapter 20, verse 4. And a physical resurrection in Revelation chapter 20, verse 5. So they have it a little bit switched. There's also a post-millennial view where the church is here during that 1,000-year reign. The church actually ushers in the 1,000-year reign of Christ. They tend to see that the church would become very militant through the preaching of the gospel, and the world would be successfully evangelized. There are a number of Bible verses that seem to give that credibility. But only after the world is successfully Christianized will Jesus return. Now, keep in mind, the church-generated millennium may be a spiritualized period of time. It may cover many millennia. We may be in it already. That's how convoluted and contrived some of these things are, since the Bible doesn't really say any of this sort of thing, at least not outright. What's real today is the threat from Turkey going forward, a situation the Bible anticipates with remarkable certitude. Now, in the next segment, we're going to be looking at more biblical futuristic events evolving right in front of our eyes, and I don't want you to go away. But just today, the Israeli military announced that they are sending additional tanks and artillery cannons to the Syrian border. They're doing that tonight, which is probably already done by now. They're about 8 hours ahead of us. All of this is in light of a renewed offensive by dictator Bashar Assad of Syria in cooperation with the Russian military. They're moving into this area, southern Syria, but it's northern Israel, and they're moving against the remaining rebel holdouts in the Syria's southwest. Israel doesn't trust them. Will they stop there, or will they continue on? They'd love to have the Golan Heights back. And so Israel's a little tense right now, and the whole region is that way, because we're getting very, very, very close. The next segment, I want to talk to you about the biblical future that is here now. Can you say blood moons? Stay with me. We'll be right back.